Hello, everybody. Welcome to Transformation Weight Control podcast. This is season 2, episode 8. So we have been at this for a while now, and the mission is to educate you and dispel all the misinformation, because the thing we do best is we bring on the best experts possible. And I have been doing this work for 45 years, and all my old research colleagues have been on this podcast. I have participants from our program, Transformation Weight Control, on talking about life with the chronic disease of obesity. And today we have on a younger researcher who I was working at the hospital at St. Luke's Hospital in New York City, and Dr. Zuraikat, Faris Zuraikat, came in after me. And so he, after the research center moved up to Columbia Presbyterian, that's when he joined. So I never got to work with him personally, but we spoke by Zoom before the podcast and hit it off instantly. He's a great guy. He's very smart and very committed to his work. And I think we kind of look alike. So for those who are, those you can say, hey, look at those guys. They're from the same mother, or born in the same hospital room. And I'd like to introduce Alex Tashinsky, my co-host of Forever, and my forever 20-year-old friend, who without him, none of this would happen, because it took me 6 months to learn how to use Zoom. So Alex is our tech guy. And I want to tell you right now that if you turn away from this podcast, you are going to miss information that will help you for the rest of your weight loss journey, because Dr. Zuraikat is an expert on sleep and eating habits and patterns. And this is what he spends his time researching. And you're not going to have the opportunity to hear an expert like him very often. So you can leave if you like, but if you do, I'm afraid you're just not going to get the benefit.
Did
Alex,
you say sleep?
Sleep, yes.
So today, of all days, I actually woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning and have been at it ever since. So it's a good place to start, maybe.
But Faris, this man, he will wake up at 3 o'clock. He lives in the desert in Nevada. He gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning to avoid the heat and goes running at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
On a regular basis. So maybe we'll talk about that too.
Yeah.
All right, so let me introduce formally, and then we will get started. So he has a doctorate degree, a Ph.D. What is your Ph.D. in formally? What is
nutritional sciences?
Yeah. Nutritional science, okay. And he is the assistant professor of nutritional medicine at the Institute of Human Nutrition at Columbia University Medical Center in New York City. Vagelos? Is that how you say it? Vagelos. Vagelos, College of Physicians and Surgeons. I used to be on faculty up there. You'd think I should know how to pronounce it. So he did earn his doctoral degree at Penn State University, where he studied with Dr. Barbara Rolls. And if you know anything about weight loss and losing weight and your journey, you've heard of volumetrics, and Dr. Rolls is one of the leading researchers in the world. That is not an exaggeration. And she works up at Penn State at the food lab there, which is one of the most famous in the world, and has published gazillions of papers. And then he did his what's called a postdoctoral fellowship after you get your degree at Columbia University with an old colleague of mine who has been on a podcast, Dr. Marie-Pierre Saint-Onge, who recently switched her focus to how to eat to sleep better. So we're going to talk a little bit of a difference about, we're going to talk the opposite. We're going to talk about how sleep is affecting your food intake and so forth, because that's one of the things that our guest is an expert on. So I would like to introduce him and thank him for coming. Is there anything you'd like to say before we launch into some of my questions and so forth?
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Rich and Alex. I'm excited to do this. I'm not a seasoned veteran with podcasts, but I'm excited about the opportunity. And I just want to say spot on in terms of your acknowledgement of Dr. Barbara Rolls and Dr. Marie-Pierre Saint-Onge. I've been really, really fortunate to have the best mentorship. Barbara and I have remained really close. She's been a really critical figure in my journey. And she truly is, as you said, Rich, the leading expert in the study of human eating behaviors, food properties that affect food intake and energy intake. And she's really unique way, an impactful way, leverage that information to develop her volumetrics diet plan,
Right.
which is really all about sort of maintaining satiety and consuming larger portions to feel more sated for longer while reducing your caloric intake. And then I just continued with my hot streak and my luck with going on to do my postdoc with Marie-Pierre, who is a nutrition scientist by training, absolutely brilliant. She knows body composition, she knows energy expenditure, but above all, she knows sleep and circadian rhythms. And, you mentioned that she's sort of shifted her focus to how sort of diet and sleep and nutrients can affect sleep quality potentially. But it's worth noting that she was one of the original people studying the effects of sleep on. And so I'm very lucky in that she sort of made space for me to kind of move in there. So I would not be here without her. She's fantastic. And I'm excited to talk about, some of the more recent work that we've done to try to extend her really impactful and landmark work in that space.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, thank you for making that correction. I sort of said she shifted her focus, but I didn't say what she shifted it from. And you are correct in
But she's
clarifying that she is.
She's good at everything. I mean, she knows.
Yeah, she is. She is really good at everything, and she really laid the groundwork for a lot of sleep research and how that affects how we eat and what we eat and our impulse control and everything. She really laid the groundwork for everything. So I agree, and she was a wonderful podcast guest, as I know you will be as well. All right, so to get started, let me first just ask you, so people get a feel for you, what is it that got you interested in studying sleep of all things? Like who wakes up one day and say, I think I want to study sleep?
Great question. And I'll give you the honest answer. I wish that it was a more scientific answer, but so I'd always been interested in food intake regulation and sort of trying to understand why we select the foods we select, why we consume the amounts that we consume, and the different sort of factor, whether it be internally or externally, that really drive those decisions and those behaviors. And so that's a lot of what I did with Barbara at Penn State. And I was really focusing on food properties. So for instance, the caloric density of foods, the portion sizes served, other sort of environmental factors like the availability of doggy bags and things of this nature. So I'd always kind of had that interest in trying to better understand the key drivers of food intake because I was interested in body weight regulation, and I knew that food and energy intake was the key driver of weight change, right? And so I completed my PhD, and I wanted to continue my training, and I wanted to continue it in that space. But for your postdoc, especially these days, you're really kind of encouraged to seek out something new and bring a new sort of element to your research. And I was not sure what I wanted that new element to be, but I knew I wanted to be in New York City. I had a lot of friends here, and I absolutely, so the St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital, New York Nutrition Obesity Research Center. As a person who studied obesity research, so much of the landmark work came out of there. So I kind of had this dream of being at St. Luke's. Now, of course, as you noted, at the time that I was finishing my PhD, unbeknownst to me, it was no longer St. Luke's New York Nutrition Obesity Research Center. The Obesity Research Center had moved uptown, but I didn't know that. So I reached out to one of my dissertation committee members, who's another phenomenal mentor who you probably know, Kathleen Keller, who was at St.
Of course.
Yep, who was at St. Luke's for a number of years. And I said, Kathleen, you know what I'm interested in. You know my dossier. I need to tie in a new piece. I really want to be in New York. I really want to be at the New York Nutrition Obesity Research Center. Can you think of anyone that like I could work with that would mesh with me, with my sort of unusual personality, with appreciate my quirks and whatnot? And she was just immediately was like Marie-Pierre St. Onge. Marie-Pierre is trained in nutrition science. She's trained in body composition, energy expenditure, body weight regulation, and she's been studying sleep recently. And that was kind of the first time that I was like, sleep, huh? And, of course, as a as a PhD student, I'd been pretty sleep deprived, especially having just completed my dissertation work. So that was kind of interesting. And so I looked up some of her work and I ended up reaching out to her, and we hit it off right away, and we still work together to this day. She's been an amazing mentor, but it sort of was a process that I won't pretend that it was an innate interest, right? It was, the interest grew with time. The more I studied it, the more I came to understand how intimately involved sleep is with these other key factors related to body weight regulation and weight management and cardiometabolic health, the more interested I got. And then you bring in the circadian rhythms piece. And so it just kind of continued to snowball. And so now I consider myself very much a sort of a sleep and body weight and energy balance researcher. But it actually really stemmed from an interest in feeding behaviors and body weight regulation and frankly, a desire to be in New York City.
Well, I'll say this for you. You sound like a scientist because you followed a thread of questions, one after the other. So you followed the data, you followed your hunches, you followed your clinic, your scientific intellectual curiosity, and one thing led to another, which is exactly how science works. And so it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, it works.
I didn't mention in your introduction that you have over 40 publications in scientific journals, and that's quite a feather in your cap, being a relatively new investigator and principal author on many of them, and working with the likes of Dr. Rolls and Dr. St. Onge and so forth, and some very, not cryptic, I would say, but kind of interesting titles like doggy bags and downsizing, which I want to get to and ask you.
Attention grabbers, if you will.
The first question I want to ask you that probably everybody always wants to ask is, how much sleep should we get?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I will say that the recommendations vary across the lifespan. And I will be the first to admit that my expertise falls in the adults, right? So I obviously your sleep needs are greater. I have an infant now. He sleeps, 14, 16 hours. And that sort of, shrinks over time with decreasing sleep need. But for adults, which is the population that I study, the recommendation is 7 or more hours per night. And I'm careful to say 7 or more hours. That's what the American Academy of Sleep Medicine and the Sleep Research Society and the National Sleep Foundation have determined should be the guidelines for healthful sleep duration, based on a lot of literature. Now, a lot of people will say 7 to 9 hours per night with that sort of upper limit at 9, but that's not actually what the recommendation is. And the reason that some people put that upper limit is based on some epidemiological evidence that might be the result of sort of reverse causality, to keep it kind of brief, which is basically like, people observationally that sleep really long tend to be sicker, but we can't say that they're sicker because they sleep longer, right? And so for that reason, the recommendation is 7 or more hours per night for adults.
So you're sort of talking about a chicken or the egg, which comes first, is what you're saying.
Right. When you get to that higher
when you talk about causality.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And is there data on the average amount of sleep an American gets, an American adult? Hours per night? Is there any data?
There are data. They're not necessarily the best data. So, for instance, like the National Health Interview Survey, there are other, and Haynes collects some data on sleep. A lot of it tends to be self-reported. Sleep is a little different than diet in that a lot of people, I'm not one of these people, but good friends and colleagues are, that say, a self-reported diet is a useless measure. You're better off not getting a measure. I think sleep is different than that, right? There is value to subjective sleep, and self-reported sleep does have some of the same risks as self-reported diet in terms of sort of recall bias or just poor estimation. But the long and the short of it is there are population estimates from these big population, nationally representative samples, and the average sleep duration among adults is somewhere in the 6 to 6.5 hour range. But what's sort of missed with the average is the massive variability that you get, right?
Right.
And so our group has been interested in sort of studying short sleepers. So these are individuals who don't sleep 7 hours per night. And using those sort of big self-reported data sets, what we find is short sleepers are really sort of in and around that 6 hour mark, right? 6 hours and 15 minutes. And so even if you're seeing like estimates that of averages that are a little bit higher, we don't want to necessarily assume that as a population we're hitting the mark, because the average is washing out that variability there.
Got it. Okay.
Just
So
out of curiosity, does that take naps into account? Like I don't do
question.
naps, but I know plenty of people that don't sleep well at night, but then take a nap or two.
So naps are a really hot topic. I get asked about naps a lot, as I think a lot of sleep researchers do. Typically, what we're looking at is overnight sleep, nocturnal sleep. But there are questions that ask specifically about 24-hour sleep, right? Sleep over the 24 hours. In terms of those nationally representative samples, I think they are asking about the 24 hours. You know, I'm not fully confident saying that, but I do think they're asking about the 24 hours. But it's a great point that you bring up, Alex, that is, you know, maybe we'll talk about more as we move on in the podcast is what, you know, what is the role of naps, right? Are naps good? Are they bad? Are they, you know, should they count towards your total sleep time? Controversial topic. So,
all right. Well, I made a note, so we'll get to it.
Okay.
We will make sure. So before we do dive a little more into the science, so I'm sitting at home and I'm listening to this or watching. I want to be incentivized to sleep, to pay attention to sleep. So, Faris, just synthesize for us. Number one, why is it that we have to sleep? Like, we spend a third of our time, you're saying 7 hours. So that's almost a third of the day. What a waste of time to sleep for a third of the day. Why do we sleep at all? Why can't we just stay awake? And, you know, and I told folks in my program, I'm going to ask you this because we were talking about it. So there's the question. Why do we have to sleep? What happens? Tell us.
It's a great question, and it's one that comes up, I think, a lot. Like, you think about like New York City, right? The city that never sleeps, and our society really tends to kind of value like low sleep duration. And I only got 3 hours. Like, you're bragging about it. I only got 3 hours of sleep last night. I was doing this, and that. And I think we're really making a mistake there. So sleep is a biological need, right? I mean, they have animal studies. Now, of course, they've never done this in humans. It would be completely unethical, but they have animal studies where they have done complete sleep deprivation, and it accelerates mortality, right? So there is a biological need to sleep. There are so many physiological processes that are either directly impacted by or that are interacting with our sleep wake cycles. So, you know, kind of the short answer is, you know, our whole body system, our homeostasis is largely dependent on us achieving sleep, right? Obtaining sleep. Our brain, there are studies, I think a study in Science that was measuring the temperature of the brain, and it actually increases with increasing sleep debt. And so, you know, it is what you would think. It's a rest period. It's a period where, you know, there's you know, some data to suggest that like the brain is sort of cleaning itself. There's toxins are removed, etc. I'm not a neuroscientist. I don't focus so much on the brain, but we know in terms of our periphery, right, sleep is largely involved in maintaining glucose homeostasis. It can affect our energy metabolism. It can affect our sort of, as we'll talk about, our drive to eat. It affects our hormonal systems. It can affect our mood, our cognition, right? It's absolutely critical to so many, if not all, of our sort of health functions in biological and physiological systems. And we and others have demonstrated pretty clearly that not obtaining a sufficient amount of sleep, particularly over a prolonged period, can have these really adverse consequences to a wide range of health outcomes.
Okay. All right. And I also promised them, and I would ask them one other question related to this. Are there any biological organisms that don't sleep? Do trees sleep? Do plants go to sleep? Do they rest? Do they need the same thing that Homo sapiens need?
That's a great question, and I'll admit that it's a little bit beyond my sort of area of expertise. But what I will say is that plants, while they don't sleep, and I guess this is an important sort of point, right? When we talk about sleep, sleep is defined by changes in brain activity, right? And so you think about the different stages of sleep. These are characterized by different sort of electrical activity in the brain, right? So plants don't sleep, but one of the earliest studies in the circadian sciences, to my knowledge, was actually informed by plants, which was observing that in the presence of light and dark, these plants actually sort of demonstrated a circadian rhythmicity, and in the absence of light, I think they wilted. It's a study that I have to brush up.
This is fantastic.
Yeah, the author is escaping me now, and I'm doing a poor job, I'm sure, of reiterating.
Oh no, you're doing great.
But yes, no, there is we show it on a lot of our slides and these when we're talking about circadian rhythms to say that literally this chronicity, this circadian rhythm is demonstrated by non-mammals. It's demonstrated in it's observed in Drosophila, right? Like fruit flies have a pretty good circadian rhythm, and even plants seem to demonstrate this sort of 24-hour cycle.
Listen, you gave me a beautiful answer here, as a scientist would, because the idea that plants will wilt if they don't get any dark time is a perfect way that I can translate sleep for humans. You're going to wilt if you don't get some sleep. So, yes. I mean, in all fairness, really, I've done a lot of mountain climbing in my time, high altitude. We can go for about 3 days with 3 or 4 hours of sleep, carrying 60-pound backpack in heavy snow, ice climbing, everything. But after 3 days, that's it. We wilt. If we don't get enough.
You will accumulate what's called sleep debt, and that directly impacts your biological systems. Your body will develop an sleep inertia, and you will feel it, right, as you're talking about. So I'll have to send you that paper. I can literally see the pictures here of the plants, and I think it's a French scientist that did it. It's kind of a fun. Yeah, I'll have to send that to you.
That sounds great.
Quick question on sleep debt. Can you actually catch up on sleep debt? Because what I've heard is you never really recover lost sleep. So if it's lost, it's lost.
So that's a great question, Alex. And it's actually a question that Marie-Pierre is conducting a clinical trial to try to address. We don't yet know. Everything that you often hear about catch-up sleep is either informed by sort of observational studies that are making inferences that they probably can't, or really sort of small scale, extreme sleep restriction and then a day or two of recovery, but you're not looking at the cycles of it, right? So the answer is we're not sure, right? At least in terms of cardiometabolic systems. And so stay tuned, because actually Marie-Pierre is leading a study that's investigating exactly that. And also this idea that we call social jet lag, right? So it's one thing to have sort of short sleep during the week, and then you have this weekend recovery sleep or catch-up sleep, right? So that's one question, is your question, Alex, is that truly allowing your homeostatic systems, if you will, to come back to balance, right? But then the other question that is sort of when we think about like what's happening in the real world is when you're doing that catch-up sleep, especially when you're like, you think about like younger adults, oftentimes that catch-up sleep is happening at a different window, right, than your typical, than your weekday sleep, right? So maybe you're sleeping 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. during the week. You have kids, you get up early, you got to get them ready. You got to go to work. And then on the weekends, you're maybe staying up a little bit later because you want to watch that Netflix show that you hadn't gotten around to yet. The kids are in bed, and so you're going to bed at midnight, but you're sleeping in until 9 a.m., right? If your kids will let you, right? So now your midpoint of sleep, right, has actually shifted. So your sleep timing has shifted. And that can disrupt circadian rhythms, right? And so that's the other kind of part of it is, okay, so if there is a benefit to getting that recovery sleep, is it attenuated by having this delayed sleep timing or sort of inconsistent sleep timing? And that's the question that Marie-Pierre is currently investigating in a really sort of elegant study. Yeah. So stay tuned.
Thank you.
We'll find out.
Good. A part of my job is when scientists say use terms that I think the listener is not going to understand. It's my job to go back and have you clarify. So I'm going to quickly ask you to just say what homeostatic status means. Because you mentioned it a few times. What does it mean?
Yeah, so it's really what I'm talking about. We're talking about homeostasis is that our body is sort of all of our sort of physiological systems have this kind of target range, if you will, that we want to be in, that they sort of have this tendency to return to in the absence of some perturbation or disruption. And so, for instance, we can think about glucose, for instance, right? We know that a healthy
glucose being, just to clarify for people, glucose, you mean sugar.
Blood sugar. Yes, exactly. Blood sugar. Right? So
yep.
our cells need sugars. It needs glucose. It needs what we're calling blood sugar. And we want to be at this sort of range of 80 to 100 for most people, because that is the sort of range that has been shown to nourish the cells adequately, not lead to sort of a hyperinsulin response or a hypoinsulin response. And insulin is, if you think of a sort of a lock and key, right? Insulin is the sort of the key that opens the lock that lets glucose into the cells, right? And so when we're talking about sort of glucose homeostasis, for instance, it's getting back the body's systems that has these mechanisms, right? Tissue level mechanisms, whole organism sort of mechanisms to try to get our blood sugar levels back to that range. And then when you are consistently out of that range or having these insults to your physiological systems, like not sleeping enough consistently, now things go out of whack, for lack of a better sort of word. And so if we're not in sort of homeostasis, things are out of whack. Things are either too high or too low, and that's not great for our sort of body to function at its best.
Perfect. Thank you. And of course, when it's out of whack, as you say, it's going to affect our appetite. It's going to affect our food intake, our calorie intake, our ability to manage our weight, our body weight, when our blood sugar is going up and our insulin is all over the place. All these things are going to have effects on the appetite regulation.
Everything's connected, right? Our bodies are very sort of interconnected systems. And so when one system goes awry, another system tries to compensate.
Right.
And it can create problems.
And so the sleep really does bring us back to that term you're using, homeostasis, where things are cool, where things are working
where we want
nicely.
Them to be.
Good.
Yeah.
Where we want them to be. Good. Right. No, it's beautiful. All right. The second term, and then we will move on. Circadian rhythm. Everybody has probably used the term. Yeah. I doubt anybody really knows what it means. Tell us in your own words, for the lay population, what does it mean, circadian rhythm? What is it? You've said it 100 times so far.
So circadian comes from circa dia, which is approximately a day, right? So these are our approximately 24-hour rhythms that over the course of, maybe 40 years or so now, scientists have identified are really largely sort of guiding a lot of our physiological systems, right? And so if you look at a lot of these internal systems, let's go back to glucose, for instance, right? So glucose levels, blood glucose levels, right, oscillate or sort of move on this 24-hour rhythm. Your cortisol levels, right, naturally sort of oscillate or move on this 24-hour rhythm. And so what they're finding is that without going into the molecular sort of biology of it, is that we have these sort of internal clocks throughout the body. The master clock is in the brain, and these clocks are responding to cues, right? And so the master clock, its primary time giver is light, right? Originally sunlight, now can be artificial light, right? And so that light, right, is sending a signal to the brain, which is then sending signals to the body that it's daytime. We should move to our daytime functions. And in the absence of light, there's a cascade of biological systems that are activated and others that are inactivated that then tells the rest of the body it's night, it's time for rest, right? And the interesting thing, so that's our circadian rhythm, is this 24-hour rhythm, right? But what's interesting is that your behavior can also affect your circadian rhythms. So a group of scientists from the university, I believe it's University of Texas Southwestern, and then there's some folks at the Salk Institute in San Diego who've been really interested in these circadian rhythms, found that you have these sort of biological clock mechanisms in effectively every tissue of the body, in your muscle, in your pancreas, in your liver, and in your heart, right? And those are also receiving time cues, right? And the goal is to have a coordinated system, right? So when it's light out, you're feeding, you're telling your digestive system, your liver, which metabolizes the nutrients, it's daytime. These are cues. The energy, the nutrients, these are cues to those systems. It's daytime. We want to be in the daytime mode. And at nighttime, they're presumably or hopefully in nighttime mode, which is why, when you have, you hear a lot about like shift work, right? Where people are up overnight, right? And sleeping during the day, or people who are eating at inappropriate circadian time. So eating late at night, eating overnight. This can affect your, what we call sort of circadian rhythmicity, the sort of harmony, right, of those systems. And that discordance between those systems can have really negative consequences and affect this homeostasis again.
Okay. The way that I relate to this the most is I have done an enormous amount of camping in my life, and you fall into the rhythm of day and night, daylight and night. And so it starts to get dark and you stop and you set your tent and you eat, and then you fall asleep and you wake up when the sun comes up, and you fall into this natural rhythm.
Yes.
And I think that's exactly what you're describing.
Yes,
And
that's
it
exactly
feels great. And I've been out in freezing cold weather. I've never been sick once on any camping trip or anything, because everything just falls into homeostasis, like you say, and you follow the natural flow of the rhythm of things, because there's no phones, there's no TV, there's none of the distractions that we complicate our brain with.
Yeah, no, this is absolutely an evolutionary, adaptive, sort of situation, right? Where humans evolved, right? Our circadian rhythms evolved to follow this. What's interesting, though, and I'll just say this briefly, is scientists at Harvard demonstrated that you can actually, that your body systems will continue on this approximately 24-hour circadian rhythm in the absence of any cues, in the absence of light, in the absence of any information about time, any time cues. Our bodies will still oscillate on these approximately 24-hour rhythms. So it's a really fascinating kind of biological sort of phenomenon.
That is interesting. So if I'm at home and I'm a shift worker and I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I work the midnight to 8 a.m. What are you supposed to say to those folks? Because that's their job.
Yeah.
Are they just out of luck?
No, I mean, this is so first off, shift work is, and it is, people have to do it, right? We're in a 24-hour society. Right. There are jobs that require it. It is one of the, I hate to say it this way, but like one of the worst things that you can do to your body, honestly. But this is an area of active research. A lot of groups are trying to study interventions to counter the adverse effects of shift work. So let's say what it is. There is a lot of data, both observational and experimental, showing that the shift work, right, the inverted sleep schedule has really negative consequences on the body. However, as you said, we're going to have shift work. We're always going to have shift work. And so what can we do? These people shouldn't just be damned to, this negative fate. That is fortunately an area that is really generating a lot of interest and a lot of research, is these kind of countermeasures, they call them, to the circadian disruption caused by shift work. And can we even, so things like, and I preface this with saying all of this research is sort of in development, it's preliminary, but there's some evidence supporting the idea of like using bright light therapy, for instance. And so, exposing yourself, trying to kind of mimic that sort of bright light when you're awake and creating darkness when you're sleeping, to at least sort of realign. And then now there's a lot of interest in this idea of like sort of time restricted eating. And so eating in a more narrow window that falls closer to what is sort of the biological day. And these kind of pilot studies have shown favorable effects so far, but it's an area where people are really trying to do more research. Yeah.
All right, good. And Alex, it looked like you had a question. Did you?
I did. What about people in parts of the world where you have daylight for months at a time or night for months at a time?
Yeah. I don't know I know there's literature out there. I don't know it so well. My guess is that, it would be kind of comparable to this shift work situation where you've got, like 4 hours of daylight, if that. And, how does that affect your circadian rhythms? And would those people benefit from things like, bright light therapy, right, during the sort of daytime hours? It's a great question. It's hard to say without knowing the literature well, which I don't, frankly, how it affects sort of health. But, there's always these other factors that interact, right, with sleep and circadian rhythm, which is a lot of the kind of research I do. And so, will those people necessarily be more unhealthy than, say, the general American population, right? I think it's probably going to depend, right, on a variety of other lifestyle factors that they're engaging in. But it's a great question.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's shift gears and move toward sleep and health, something you know a lot about.
Yeah.
And also how sleep affects food intake.
Yeah.
Because after all, it's a weight loss program I'm running, and that's what people are listening for. So I will leave it up to you whether you want to start with sleep and health or sleep and food intake regulation. I got 1,000 questions for each, but I'm going to leave it up to you a little bit, whichever way you want to start.
I can start with sleep and food because that's sort of where my journey began and my interest in the topic.
Okay.
So look, you and your group knows this very well. As I said earlier, energy balance drives weight change. And if you're in a positive energy balance where you're consuming more calories than you're expending, you'll over time gain weight and accumulate fat mass and total mass. And vice versa. If you are expending more calories than you're consuming and sustaining this over time, you'll lose weight. And I have a lot of friends who are kinesiologists and exercise physiologists, and I think many of them will agree with me based on the data. Physical activity, which is the sort of most modifiable piece of energy expenditure, which is multidimensional, can absolutely facilitate weight loss and maintenance of weight loss. But it simply, in the context of losing weight and achieving a negative energy balance, it's really difficult to achieve a negative energy balance through physical activity alone. And so diet tends to be the key modifiable factor that drives weight change. And that's why I've been interested in diet, right? And we all eat, right? And so and so I was kind of been interested in the energy intake side. And so being somebody who's interested in energy balance and body weight regulation and knowing food's key role and eating's key role, that was kind of where I started getting into this literature. And I came across a really wonderful short review by Ted Van Italy, right? So who was the sort of founding director, right, of the Nutrition Obesity Research Center. And this just kind of shows how much of a forward-thinking guy he was. This was, years ago, there was a special issue in the journal Metabolism that he co-led that was all about the interplay between sleep and eating. And he has this really lovely short piece where he goes through a variety of different hormones that we have studied a lot in the context of food intake regulation. Things like ghrelin, things like GLP-1, things like orexin, right? And many others, even cortisol. And so somebody on the nutritional side of things, I'm thinking about those hormones often and their role in controlling food intake, right?
And let me interrupt you for one moment. All the hormones you just mentioned all control food intake one way or the other.
Exactly.
So,
And
okay,
there's good
just so
evidence
people
of
know.
that, right? And
Yeah.
So folks like Zave Pisane, right, who would do infusions of CCK with Harry Kiselev and show how that affected ad lib intake. So yes, these are hormones that we are naturally producing in our body that are involved in our determining how much food we eat. The meal size, some of them determine meal size, some of them determine sort of what we call satiety, which is like how long we can go until we're sort of feeling hungry again. And some of them are involved with food initiation, like ghrelin, for instance, right, is thought to kind of stimulate. It's like this hunger hormone, right? So in any case, Ted did this wonderful job of going through these variety of established hormones that affect food intake regulation and talked about their dual role in sleep-wake regulation. And, and I kind of it was just such a new thing to think about. Now, I'll give Marie-Pierre credit. It was her, I think it was 2011 AJCN paper where she did the sleep restriction and showed that it affected ad lib intake that really got me excited. It was, I was already kind of in this mode. But as a person who'd studied ingestive behavior and was familiar with a lot of these hormones, to see that other way of looking at them, right? And it makes a lot of sense, or it made a lot of sense to me, which is, when you're awake, you would think your biology would be working in a way that would promote food intake, right? This is the time that we nourish ourselves. And when you're asleep, you would think that those systems would inhibit food intake. And that was exactly what he was showing through sort of talking about what sort of animal studies showed with these different hormones. And so the long and the short of it is, sleep and food intake are really intimately linked, right? Both through these kind of what I'll call homeostatic mechanisms, right? So the sort of release of these endogenous hormones from the gut, or through more hedonic, which is like sort of reward, pleasure systems, right? And so it was indeed this series of studies that Marie-Pierre did that were so, I just loved them. They're so elegant that they were these very controlled studies where they took healthy people. These were people without obesity. They didn't have any comorbid disease. They were healthy sleepers. They slept 7 to 9 hours per night. This was verified using wrist actigraphy, right? So if you have your Apple Watch or whatever, these are, sort of proxy measures of sleep, but well validated and confirmed that these were all healthy sleepers. And she took these people and had them do 2 different conditions in a random order. And one condition, this was all inpatients, was totally controlled. She had them maintain their habitual sort of healthy sleep duration. So they had this 9-hour sleep opportunity, right? So that they could get their 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. And they assessed this using gold standard measures to confirm that they did. And then after 4 days of this on a controlled diet, they had ad lib access to food. They could eat as much or as little as they'd like, as frequently as they'd like, right? They measured it objectively. And on those first 4 days, they were on a controlled diet and were actually assessing, they were collecting blood to assess circulating levels of these appetite regulating hormones and other sort of markers of cardiometabolic risk. And then in the other condition, they actually made people go to bed later and wake up earlier. So they only had this 4-hour sleep opportunity. Same thing over 4 days. And then on the 5th day, they could eat as much or as little as they'd like. And what they found, and this is comparing the same people, me to me, you to you, on average ate about 300 calories more over that day.
When they slept less.
When they slept less, yeah. So,
but
go ahead,
but isn't that because the day's longer? I mean, I ate more calories today, but my day started at 1 a.m.
That's a great question, right? So one of the postulations is that we know energy expenditure is higher when you're awake. Is this a compensatory mechanism because you're burning more calories. Well, she studied that. She put people in a metabolic chamber, right, over 24 hours. And indeed, energy expenditure was a little bit higher when you had this sleep restriction compared to adequate sleep, but it was about 90 calories higher. They're eating 300 calories more, right? So something's awry, right? And so you're in this energy imbalance, right? And what's more, in that study, she had doubly labeled water. So she had this measure of 24-hour daily, sort of average daily energy expenditure. It didn't differ between the two conditions, right, over the week or whatever it was. And so, yeah, and so that was fascinating to me. And there's some evidence that, this is maybe driven in part by shifts in these, again, I'll call this like sort of your homeostatic drive to eat. So maybe you have higher circulating levels of ghrelin, which is making you feel hungrier. So you're going for food more. And maybe you had suppressed levels of GLP-1. We've all heard of GLP-1 now. It's an endogenous hormone, which actually doesn't have much of an impact, endogenous hormone on eating. Now, in the context of a GLP-1 mimetic, right? Yes, it does. But in any case, I digress. But in any case, there's some mixed evidence of shifts in these kind of circulating levels of hormones in the effects. The effect on energy intake, on the amount of food people consume, is consistent. You restrict people's sleep, they eat more consistently. And then in the other piece that she did that I thought was so fascinating that really drew me, is she actually put these people in a scanner. She did fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging, and showed them pictures of different types of foods and looked at the activation, right, in different regions of the brain associated with things like reward, pleasure, and inhibitory control. And sort of the long and the short of 2 papers worth of data is that these individuals, when they're sleep restricted, are more responsive to food cues, and particularly higher calorie food cues when they're sleep restricted compared to when they're having their adequate sleep. So sleep is really integral to our food intake regulation. And we're sort of seeing that, consistently, and it's sustained, right? If you're doing, longer periods of sleep restriction, 2 weeks of sleep restriction, people are still consuming on average 250 to 300 calories more per day. So I thought that was really a fascinating piece that drew me in. And I think there's a lot more work to be done to better understand it, right? But that was sort of the piece that was like, wow, this is fascinating.
All right. So I want to clarify a couple things and bring this to a simpler idea for people to sort of wrap their head around. Number one, you use the word endogenous, which means it's coming from within. The body is secreting these, making these hormones. So let's give a very simple example for people of a hormone like you've mentioned, ghrelin. And ghrelin is a gut hormone secreted in the gut, and it tells your brain to makes you hungry. If you knock it out in a rat, they won't eat. They just don't have any drive to eat. Right. All right. So what you're saying is, if ghrelin is a hormone that makes you hungry, and it's a normal thing, it's supposed to happen. If you sleep less, you're going to have higher levels of ghrelin. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So that's what some studies show, not all. And that's why there's controversy around what's driving this. But yes, that is what some studies show. And, on the other hand, satiety hormones, so these hormones that work the opposite direction, tell your brain, we've eaten, chill. We don't need to eat anymore, like GLP-1. In some populations, in some studies, are reduced, right, with sleep restriction. All right. So more work is needed. The take home is people are eating more. We're not quite precisely sure what the key driving factor is with insufficient sleep. Or is it? I tend to think it's both, right? As you noted, Rich, these hormones, yes, we're measuring circulating levels of them, but what's their target? The brain, right? The brain is what controls everything, right? And so, a lot of people are on this camp that's, no, it's hedonic. It affects your hedonic reward systems, and it makes you, want to eat more and more responsive to external food cues, the smell of food, the taste of sweet, and there's some data to support that. Absolutely. Some people are saying it's that, so it can't be this, the gut hormone piece, right? I tend to think it could be both. Yeah. I mean, more work is needed, but something's happening in the body that's leading people to eat more. Or as Alex said, another possible reason that I think is contributing to a degree is that you're awake longer, right? You're awake longer, you've got more chances to eat, right? When you're up longer, are you going to the gym? Most people aren't. They're sitting on the couch, they're sedentary, and they're eating, right? I do it.
That's right. So, one of our strategies, one of our strategies was someone saying, they're binging, they've had dinner, they had dessert, and now they're going to have something else at 10:30 or 11 o'clock. Or, one of the strategies we tell them, go to sleep.
Go to sleep.
Like, get into bed and go to sleep. You're not going to eat.
Let your body systems do their thing, right?
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So, all right. Again, just to clarify, one of the terms, you use the word hedonic a lot, and I just want people to understand that just means pleasure, and there's pleasure and reward in the brain, and certain foods are going to have a greater reward. If I'm standing next to somebody and we're both talking about chocolate chip cookies, for one of us, the chocolate chips are going to be more rewarding than they are for me, let's just say. And they will work harder
you can see
for
the brain light up. Yeah, you'll see regions of the brain light up that are involved in sort of pleasure and reward.
All right. So, you mentioned in Marie Pierre's research, she showed a difference of 300 calories a day. Doesn't sound like a lot, but I just did the math, and that's, if you did it every day, it's 31 pounds in a year.
Yeah.
So it isn't trivial. Even 100 calories a day difference is 11 pounds in a year. So we're not talking about insignificant amounts of calories. On a daily basis, fine, but if it's consistent, then we have a problem and we're going to have weight gain. I mean, 300 calories extra, more than you need in a year, 300 per day in a year is 31 pounds.
Yeah.
So it's not minor.
And that was sort of where I entered the picture, which was at a point where the field, and particularly Marie Pierre, we're starting to think about, are these scientific models of sleep restriction that we're imposing realistic, right? Are people really sleeping 4 hours per night, 3.5 hours per night on a consistent basis? Because as you said, Rich, if that were the case, you'd see, now absolutely, insufficient sleep is correlated with weight gain over time, consistently, right? But not 31 40 pounds, 25 pounds, right? So the question kind of became, what are people really doing, right? If you're a short sleeper, what are your actual behaviors? And that's where you kind of go back to this observational sort of population-based data, and you look at short sleepers, and like I said, average is more around sort of 6 hours and 15 minutes, right? They're not missing the mark by a ton, they're missing the mark, but they're doing it consistently. And so that was the research that I did as a postdoctoral fellow, again with Marie Pierre. So you'll hear me say her name a lot because she is a person who has guided a lot of my work and scientific interest. Now I'm doing more on the end of obesity treatments and how sleep plays a role there. But we had to lay the foundation. And so I came in and we were doing these studies that we were now having healthy sleepers restrict their sleep, delay their bedtime by just an hour and a half per night, but we had them do it consistently over 6 weeks. And what we found, and again, in a crossover study, I mean, this was a huge study, took years. Crossover design, meaning we're comparing people to themselves under two different conditions: healthy habitual sleep, go to bed when you normally go to bed, wake up when you normally wake up. We track them, we confirm that their sleep duration is adequate, and we check in with them weekly to make sure that they're doing what we're telling them to do. The other condition, delaying their bedtime, we thought that was really more representative of what people do. Delay your bedtime by an hour and a half, wake up at the same time, track them. We measured body weight changes over the 6 weeks, and indeed, people gained weight in sleep restriction relative to adequate sleep. It wasn't pounds and pounds. It was about a half kilo, right? A little over a half kilo. Seems really trivial. But again, you're talking about generally healthy people who are undergoing a model of sleep restriction that we would expect is happening over the course of an entire year or longer. So if you're gaining a half kilo every month or so, every month and a half, and that's happening consistently over time, that weight is going to add up, right? So we feel that finding is quite clinically significant. Interestingly, we did MRI to assess body composition. There's no sort of preferential increase in fat, adipose tissue volume relative to skeletal muscle, for instance. So it's not, I will say this, it's not as if, you're sleep restricted and now your fat depots are soaking up all the energy and you're just having this terrible cardiometabolic storm. No, you're gaining weight. You're gaining same as you would normally gain weight, a little bit of everything sort of proportionally, but you're gaining weight. And so you are gaining fat mass. And we see leptin leptin goes up, right? Which is a marker of it's secreted in proportion to the fat mass.
And leptin makes you full.
Right.
So people know what you're talking about.
So that's where it's a little counterintuitive. But I talked to Rudy Leibel about this, right? And actually, this idea that leptin makes you full is, I think, a mischaracterization, a common one, right? But leptin, and Rudy Leibel, for anyone who's listening who doesn't, he is the person who discovered leptin, right? I mean, he is the guru. And I will do my best to represent his words accurately, but read his work. He's a genius. But in any case, he describes leptin as a sort of thermostat, if you will, for energy stores, right? It's telling your brain how much stored energy do we have, how much fat do we have. But it tends to work unidirectionally in that when body fat goes down, leptin goes down, and there is a drive to replenish, a biological drive to replenish those stores. So you would think the opposite would be true, right? If you're gaining fat mass, leptin goes up, that's true. You'll then not eat as much. That's not typically the case, right? It tends to work unidirectionally. So the fact that we see increased leptin, and again, in a fasted sample, doesn't suggest to me that people are going to be inhibiting their food intake. That's not what seems to be happening. Rather, it's a biological marker supporting this finding that they're gaining weight and that their whole body volume is increasing.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you. All right, let me switch to health for a few moments. You wrote a paper, the title being Consistency is Key, Sleep Regularity Predicts All-Cause Mortality. And I picked that one because all-cause mortality, for those who don't know what that means what you die, everybody dies from, all the things we die from. So instead of dissecting each disease, we could speak in generalities for the purpose of the podcast that lack of sleep is going to affect diabetes and cardiovascular disease, all the things you've studied. Can you just sort of give us the synopsis of what is that? Consistency is key. Sleep regularity predicts all-cause mortality.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. And so that was actually a commentary we did on another person's work, which is a really nice study using this huge, I think it was the UK biobanks, 100,000 or so people. Then they have sleep measures, and they track these people over years and years and years. So you can actually measure, you can assess death, right? And look at death records and see who died and when and of what. And why I'm happy you brought that up is we've been talking exclusively about sleep duration, right? The amount of time that you're asleep at night. That study was studying sleep regularity, which is the sort of, as the name suggests, the consistency at which in that study they were looking both at the consistency of your sleep duration. So are you sleeping 7 hours per night consistently, 6 hours per night consistently, and bedtime, right? Are you going to bed within 30 minutes, right, each night? So they weren't worried so much about sleep duration as the sort of exposure, the behavior. They were rather looking across days, how consistent or inconsistent are you? And they were able to show that greater variability, greater inconsistency, right, in your day-to-day sleep schedules was associated with higher risk for all-cause mortality and some sort of cause-specific. I think they saw increased risk for cardiovascular mortality, I believe cancer mortality as well. So again, this is not you can't infer causality from this, but as you said, Rich, we on our end are doing more of the kind of interim work, that sort of more mechanistic work to show sleep duration has a causal effect on body weight. Sleep duration has a causal effect on glucose metabolism and insulin sensitivity. It has a causal effect on other sort of biomarkers of cardiometabolic risk. And they've now taken it to sort of your furthest endpoint that you can go, which is death, right? And indeed see that's the association. So in that case, they were actually controlling, they were putting sleep duration in their model and controlling for it to say, we want to make sure that this isn't just that people who are inconsistent are also short sleepers. They were able to find an independent association there. And so that is more and more we are recognizing the importance of what we're calling multidimensional sleep health. Sleep health is not just duration, right? There's quality, there's regularity, there's sort of how, your sort of subjective feelings of how you felt like you slept. That's meaningful, right? So,
yeah. So how rested you feel it? How rested you feel in the morning?
Absolutely. Absolutely correlated with health outcomes.
So we can make a general statement that if it's not consistent, if we're not so rested, if we're all of that, it's going to contribute to ill health, poor health.
Yes. Yeah, I think we can pretty confidently say that based on the data that's out there.
All right. So we have some time left. I don't want to keep people forever. So I'm going to give you a couple of quickies that I want to pick your brain at. Number one, what about sleeping pills?
Yeah.
Should we be taking them? Does that help with food intake? What's your take on it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So generally speaking, the American Academy for Sleep Medicine and these sort of specialty groups, professional societies of experts do not recommend the sort of habitual use of things like melatonin, tryptophan supplementation. There have been meta-analyses. So this is, sort of combining a whole bunch of studies to show sort of the pooled effect. And melatonin supplementation at certain doses can potentially have favorable effects on sleep, or at least favorable associations, I should say, but it's really inconsistent. And there are obviously concerns about sort of long-term use of melatonin and like dependency and things of that nature. Now you're like prescription medications, benzodiazepine, things of that nature, those have to be prescribed by a clinician and are typically, I think, only given in pretty extreme circumstances. And typically there's some other sort of condition, right? What's actually the most effective treatment, right? And we're not talking about obstructive sleep apnea here. So obstructive sleep apnea is a different sort of phenotype, but just sort of thinking more about like sort of sleep quality and insomnia specifically. So this is sort of the persistent difficulty falling asleep, maintaining sleep, waking up earlier than you want to, not being able to get back to sleep, which affects a lot of people, right? The most effective treatment for that is actually cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So this is a cognitive behavioral therapy, the same as you would get for a lot of psychological and psychiatric disorders, but it's really centered around the sort of causes of the poor sleep and bringing in some of this sort of what we call like sleep hygiene sort of interventions, things like trying to set a consistent bedtime. Sometimes they'll even have you do sleep restriction for a little bit to develop that sleep inertia, that sort of homeostatic sleep drive to get you to fall asleep faster. Thinking about turning lights off, not having blue lights in bed and things of that nature. And that tends to be quite effective. And then for extending sleep duration, this is, again, a sort of new and emerging field, but actually there's one really, really nice study from a couple of years ago where they did this sleep extension intervention. It was just a brief intervention. Like if you were at one of your meetings with your group, an hour and a half structured interview. They had short sleepers who had overweight or obesity and, again, were consistently sleeping less than 7 hours per night. And they had a study team member with expertise in sort of sleep health talk with those individuals and start to get a sense of what were the factors that they indicated were sort of affecting their sleep. Was there a lot of noise outside? Are there other environmental factors? Do they have a sleeping partner? Is it a work schedule thing? And what factors are modifiable? That's what they were talking about. In the course of, maybe an hour and a half structured interview. The other thing that they did is they tracked these people's sleep. So they had these people wear, wearable devices on their wrist. And they looked at their sleep patterns with that person, right? And then they did something that I think is great. And that is they assigned nightly bed and wake times. They worked with the person to figure out what is a feasible bed and wake time. And their goal here was just to have them spend more time in bed, right? Because sleep is a physiological process, right? You can't just say, go to sleep and sleep. But they had people stay in bed longer. Over 2 weeks, they did indeed, on average, increase their sleep duration by about 80 minutes per night. And using double liquid water, objective measures had a reduction in energy intake, significant reduction in energy intake, and lost. So when you compare the control group to this group, so they lost about, actually, I think it was like about 0.75 kilos. So the net difference, the other group gained a little bit of weight who didn't get that sleep health intervention. So it was a net difference of like, I think it was something like 1.25 kilos over 2 weeks. So it actually.
So that's a few pounds.
Yeah,
a few pounds
yeah,
for people who
yeah,
don't know what a
exactly.
kilo is. Yeah.
And so, it was effective. That brief intervention with the self-monitoring, same as like what we would do with diet and physical activity, self-monitoring, goal setting, right, was effective. And this is where I don't want to, I know you have other questions, but I've got to put this in. This is where I got so excited about a role for sleep and weight management, right? Because if you can show that sleep affects food choice and intake, which we've done consistently, if you can show that sleep affects body weight through those systems, right? We know that, and you know, that one of the most difficult things with behavioral weight management is making a plan and sticking to that plan. It's really hard. Our biology is working against us. You lose a little bit of weight, your systems go crazy. Now we're talking about leptin, it's going down and your brain thinks it's starving, right? Truly, our biology. So now you've got another biological system in sleep that could potentially help you, right? At least theoretically, maintain those favorable behavior changes. And that's where my work is really kind of going and thinking about that in the context of behavioral weight management, of pharmacotherapy, of surgery, right? And thinking about, can we use sleep as a tool to help us, right, better adhere to our diet and physical activity targets, right? Can we use it to counter that biological drive to eat more when you've lost weight or be more sedentary?
That is an interesting idea that I had never even thought about. The competition between all the dysregulation and what sleep can do to correct some of that. That's fantastic. Let's return to naps for a moment, because I promised we would, and I know Alex really wants to know. If you can, in a few words, should we nap? If we should nap, will it work? How long should we nap for?
I'm gonna give you the most science answer ever, and it's the most unrewarding answer, and that's, it's complicated, right? So general consensus, from my read of the literature, is that napping can be advantageous if you are not achieving adequate sleep duration at night. So if you're using it as a means to get some of that recovery sleep, with the caveat of timing, right? If you are napping too close to your typical bedtime or in the sort of what we call like the circadian night, that could then affect your ability to go to sleep at night. The idea that naps are bad, right? It comes from this observational literature, similar to the long sleep duration, where you see associations. People who nap more regularly, who nap longer, have these adverse health outcomes. But we don't know if these people have adverse health outcomes because they just don't sleep enough and they're napping to try to catch up, right? So more and more, there's better data coming out that suggest it's nuanced. But if you're using it to recover and you're doing it in sort of a structured manner that's not, too close to bed and not leading you to be like overly sedentary, for instance, it could be advantageous. Look at the Spanish, right? They had the siesta, right? The Spanish population was the most healthy population.
Well, I was going to go there, but I'm not gonna. But is there a time limit? We have 15 minutes nap, 30-minute nap. What should people set the clock for?
Yeah,
how long?
I wish I could tell you. I don't think there's consensus on it. You hear a lot about like it shouldn't be more than 30, 40 minutes. I don't know that there's data to support that, honestly.
Okay.
So I don't think there's good enough literature to come to a strong consensus. The other piece that's tricky about this, Rich, is like, what is a nap? How do you define a nap? Right. And so again, this whole thing is becoming me talking about Marie Pierre, because as you can see, I admire her a lot. She has given her, and I think a couple colleagues, Sonia Jellick, Brooke Agarwal, have written a paper to suggest, right, this is how we should define naps consistently in the literature. And I'm embarrassed to say that I don't remember what they suggested, but there's some guidance out there, at least based on their expertise. Yeah.
Fair enough. All right. We're really running short on time. I'm going to give you just a couple quickies. I do want to ask about your doggy bag study and downsizing. Can you summarize it in just like abstract form? What did you find with doggy bags? Because everybody's done a doggy bag.
So this is the synopsis. When you serve people more food, they eat more consistently. That's the portion size effect. It's like the most no-duh sort of effect in the world, but Barbara Rose was the first to show it, as far as I know, empirically, and it's consistent. Oh my gosh, it's consistent across people, whether they're children, whether they're 3-year-olds, we've shown 3 to 5-year-olds. People show it with bottles, with infants in bottles. You give them a bigger bottle, they eat more. It's like even when you know that you have a bigger portion, people eat more. So there's this really robust portion size effect. And our group, when I was at Penn State, was really trying to understand, like, how do we counter this effect? I mean, are we just damned to eat more whenever there's more on the plate? We'd really had trouble finding a way to moderate this effect, right? And so we'd done other things. We'd done training, right? And so people would reduce their energy density. They'd consume foods that are lower in caloric density, so they still consumed a healthier, a reduced calorie, but you'd still see the weight of food, the amount of food was going up, right? So we said, you know what? Maybe people are eating more because they don't want to waste the food, right? Maybe this is one of the mechanisms, right? We know food is valuable. So let's see, right? If we say, just sort of subtly, we didn't want this to be like a behavioral nudge. We didn't want to put the doggy bag in front of them and, okay, lose the doggy bag. We just wanted to let them know it's there. So what we would do in our studies is we'd have people come to the lab, we'd serve an amount, we got really good at covertly varying the portion size in a random order across weeks.
So that they didn't know. They
didn't know.
Right.
So in half of the people, we just did the normal portion size side. We gave them a restaurant style meal, really nice meal. We had a former chef that was in there. Great. And those people serve more, eat more, right? Clear portion size effect. But the other group, right, selected at random, we just said as we served the meal, eat as much or as little as you'd like. If there are any food that you don't finish, we're happy to package it to send home with you, right? That was it. We did not want to leave the package there or anything like that. We didn't want this to be a nudge, like I said. And lo and behold, we found that it actually attenuated the portion size effect. So I think it was something like when you quantified it, with every additional 100 grams of food we serve, people in the non-doggy bag group, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, we're probably eating something like, do you have it up? It's, they're eating some 35 extra calories or something like that.
Wait, you're saying when you gave them the doggy bag, they ate less.
They ate less.
That's what you're saying.
So they basically that slope, that where you serve more, they eat more, it pulled it right down. So that you're not.
But does it mean though that they take the doggy bag home and do they eat it then when they get home right away? Or
we didn't measure it. I get asked that all the time, and I wish that we had a way of like tracking it. We don't know. I mean, they might have gone home and just ate more right after, but
all right.
But our other studies would suggest that they don't, because if you go the other way, right, if you reduce portion size, people tend to eat less and they don't show compensatory overeating at the next meal.
Right.
So,
okay. All right. Well, I would say, we deal with this a lot in the program, doggy bags. Be careful. Right? Pay attention to what you're doing. It's really fine to either leave food on the plate or take it home, but then not just consume it right away again. And, out of sight, out of mind, put it away, something like that.
Yeah, that's the goal. Save it for the next meal, save it, So.
Save it for the next meal, something like that. All right. So I have just 3 questions left, and then we'll finish. I do want to address your paper. By the way, the doggy bag study was published in the journal Appetite, which is one of the preeminent journals in the world on nutrition science. So this was no joking around study. This was a serious thing. All right. You have a paper and it's titled The Big 3 Properties of Food That Drive Intake. So if you can just tell us just what they are without too much explanation, because we are running short on time. What are the big 3 properties of food that drive intake?
portion size, calorie density, energy density, calorie density. So it's how many calories are packed into an amount of food,
Good.
and variety. Right, variety is the one that I think often gets forgotten about. If you have
The more variety, the more you'll eat.
exactly right, bigger
Yeah.
portions,
All right.
eat more. Higher energy density, tend to eat the same amount, but more calories because you're packing more calories into the same amount. And then
Right.
variety, more variety
Right.
you tend to
Yeah.
consume.
There's like that classic picture of a brownie compared to a big salad.
Yes,
And
that's
that's energy
volumetrics,
density.
right? That's volumetrics.
Exactly. Right. Okay. Second question. What are you having for dinner?
What am I having for dinner? That's a great question. So it's 7:30 now Eastern time. I'll probably make like a little breakfast for dinner, maybe some scrambled eggs, a chicken sausage, and I
All
like to
right.
try to have a fruit or a vegetable.
And what time are you going to go to sleep?
I'm going to go to sleep early because, as I mentioned, I have a 17-week-old who I know is going to wake me up in the middle of the night. So I'm living.
We need to talk about that. We need to talk about that sleep restriction with a newborn at home.
I'll
We need
tell
to
you,
talk about that.
I'm gaining the weight. You know, it's. So I'll
Is that true?
absolutely.
Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Because you're sleep deprived? Because you're sleep deprived from them?
I swear to you, I am. If I'm not cognizant of it, I feel hungrier, and I am more sort of driven to eat what I tend to call like convenience foods, right? Like
Right.
the packaged snacks, the like I don't want to make the dinner that I know is going to be lower energy density, that I know is going to actually fill me up more. I'm going to go for that. So I'm trying to be more conscious about it now. But yeah, I gained about probably 7-8 pounds since he was born.
Now, has it occurred to you to keep that kind of convenience food out of the house?
That is, it took about, what has it been? Probably about 15 weeks for me to say, Faris, you're gaining weight. You probably better apply some of these tools that you know about to, so now we're on the,
All right.
yeah.
All right. Well, listen, if you want to give me a call, we can talk more about this, but out of sight, out of mind. And what's that food doing in your house if it's a convenience food and you're doing it? Okay, thanks for your honest answer.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, and finally, anything else? Any takeaways you want people, the listeners at home, to take with them from our conversation?
Yeah, I do. I would say that we think and we are instructed and we learn so much about the importance of, in the context of weight management, about moderating your intake. There's so many different ways, right, to achieve a caloric deficit, right? And I will say, I don't know if Rich agrees. My perspective is if it works for you to achieve a caloric deficit, that's the way to go, whether it's time restricted eating. But none of these things are a magic bullet, right? And we know that. And so as important as diet and physical activity are, I think we should be thinking more about sleep and prioritizing our sleep. Like I said, to help us, right? It's a challenge every day in this food environment and with our busy lives to eat healthfully, to try to be active. And we have data showing that sleep can help us with that. And then the final piece is the part that I'm really excited about is, you know, for those of us in the science space, I just attended a whole day symposium on GLP-1 receptor agonists, your Wegovy, your Zepbound. These are fantastic medications. They are absolutely game changers. They are, you know, leveraging our biology to help us lose weight. And I was pleased to see that there was a lot of talk around the importance, and I like this term, of co-therapy that is behavioral, right? That is diet and physical activity, not adjunctive. Yeah. It is not medication and then on the side a little bit of no. They should be happening in tandem. They should be But the one thing I was disappointed about is there was hardly any mention of sleep. And so that's sort of my next step is, what is the role of sleep in the efficacy of these medications? And particularly if you stop, can sleep help us achieve those healthful behaviors?
Okay. All right. So I want to let you know, I think you know this, that I have been I started a weight loss medication support group 20 months ago, and people come weekly for 75 minutes. We've got 24 people in there who are taking GLPs, and it's myself and my dietitian, Casey, and we are doing a bang up job in helping people learn how to eat with
Good.
these medications because they're losing interest in food, or they're not eating as much, or they're eating 300 calories a day and falling asleep at their desk. And, there was a paper in Annals of Internal Medicine that showed that 25,000 visits to the emergency room, secondary to side effects of GLPs. We've been doing it for 20 months. We haven't had one visit to the
Yeah.
emergency room
And
because
that's
we are giving the highest standard of care, and we are talking about sleep. And, just to get ahead of myself a little bit here, I want to plug our program, and people should visit our website, transformationweightcontrol.com, if you're interested in our weight loss medication support group, because truthfully, in my 45 years, this is the best thing I've ever done in my
no,
career, is
and
help
you're doing a
people.
fantastic job. I mean, I'm so
It's
pleased to hear
really,
that. It's because
yeah,
your group is promoting health, right? And that's key. And
yep,
so weight loss is
that's
one
it.
thing, and that's going to help you achieve health, but so is nutritional adequacy, so is physical activity, so is sleep.
Well, my takeaway from this for tonight is that whole idea that you presented that I haven't really conceptualized completely was the competition between sleep and all these other dysregulatory mechanisms. So if sleep can overcome your overconsumption, let's say, of or whatever it is, if that to look at it in terms of sleep as a way to really help remedy some of these other health issues and things like that. I just hadn't thought about it quite in those terms. So thank you for that.
But we're working
All
on it.
right. Well, listen, we're going to have you come back because
Oh,
we've
dude,
been
that's just
gone. 90
keep
minutes never
talking.
went so fast, and you're a wealth of information, and it's a fantastic conversation. I hope people at home enjoyed it as much as we did. So, listen, really, it's a privilege to have somebody of your caliber on, and I just can't say enough about how wonderful it is to have you. And I think maybe I'll even have you come to one of our groups and give a little talk about sleep to our medication support group,
I'd be
because
happy to.
you are the man, along with Marie Pierre. It's just a pleasure to speak with someone who has so much experience and interest and knowledge. I really appreciate you making the podcast what
Thanks,
it
Rich.
is. Yeah. So, yep. So thanks very, very much. It's been a pleasure. Okay, Alex, I guess we can wrap it up. We will. Faris, do you want us to put your email address in the show notes so that people can get in touch with you?
Sure.
Okay, we'll make sure to do that, and because you might even recruit some subjects.
Yeah,
Who
there we
knows?
go.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay,
game.
that'd be great. Yep.
I'm far away though.
Alex. There you go. All right. Thanks again. A pleasure. You're a pleasure. It was
Likewise.
terrific.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so
It
much,
was
Rich.
great.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah. All right.